Well, here we are again. Felons Talk, another edition. And first of all, I want to say that yesterday's episode was ridiculous. And I looked up this guy's case after we got off the phone with him yesterday. His name was Colin Kellett. Starts Kellett. And it doesn't say anything about it's there's a story about them robbing a pot grow up in uh, like Colorado, and some guy got killed in there, and there I guess they came to his farm or whatever, and the part about his buddy getting killed in the barn is true. Uh, but there was absolutely nothing about uh, a police officer getting shot. Nothing, not one word. So I really don't know why he said all those things. I mean, I don't know why he thinks that getting the truth out is going to get him, like coming on somebody's YouTube program and telling, stories that don't really make sense to the people who are watching. Uh, it's not going to help him any. He could have told that shit to the judge. I probably did tell it to the judge, and the judge didn't want to hear it. That's why he's doing 31 years. And, I that's not a long sentence for a murder. You know what I mean? With good time and parole, he could probably be out in 20, maybe even 15 years. That's not too bad for a murder. But be all that as it may, I'm going to talk about George Harp today. Uh, I first got to Atlanta in '77, man. And right after I got there was a big article in the newspaper about Foster Sellers, uh, one of the big uh, notorious names from the Dixie Mafia. He had been broke out of the Fulton County Jail in Atlanta. Now, this is back in the day when Fulton County was only 2 stories high. It wasn't a maximum like hard jail to break out of. There had been other escapes as well. These guys actually cut the bars from the outside so that he could get out. He had friends that helped him escape, and that was pretty notorious escape. And his name rang bells, throughout the Atlanta Constitution is like uh, the New York Times of the South. Uh, they blew up his case pretty big, talked about him a lot, him being a big bank robber and all that. One of the first things I found out, one of the biggest stories that was going around when I first got to Atlanta was about George Harp. George Harp was born in Vidalia, Georgia. All right. Uh, he was a Southern boy, you know, and he eventually, he was like a lot of us. He grew up little reform school, started going to prison when he got, of age, and he made his way out west to California and got caught doing things out there, burglaries, robberies, and stuff like that. Apparently, he was involved in a lot of escapes, a lot of them, some crazy escapes and stuff. And where I kind of related to George was he liked heroin. Okay, excuse me. George was, but to the point where he would just about do anything to get it, anything. I remember being on the streets and robbing drugstores just like he did, robbing banks just like he did, and so I kind of relate to the guy a lot. Uh, but George he carried it when he got to the penitentiary. He would rob people for their heroin. Whenever there was heroin in the penitentiary, he would go to whoever had it and he would rob them with a knife, or he threatened to beat him up or something. He was a born bully, you know. But the only thing that really motivated him to bully people was drugs. Other than that, he didn't really care about bullying anybody. There was nothing else he really wanted. The most interesting thing that he did, and when I first got to Atlanta, I heard, was that while he was on escape from the California Department of Corrections, he came to the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary dressed nice in a suit, tie, briefcase, and he asked to come in and speak to Foster Sellers. This is obviously before Foster escaped from the Fulton County Jail. This was like a couple of years earlier, maybe 75, because yeah, it would be around 75 when he brought Foster Sellers an ounce of heroin into the visiting room on an attorney visit, and Foster brought it back into the penitentiary and sold it. Apparently, George and Foster had been friends a long time. I mean, that's the kind of thing you do for somebody that you care about and love. You know what I mean? He had a lot in common with Foster Sellers. But while George was in the California Department of Corrections, this was in the 60s, he became one of the originating members of the Aryan Brotherhood. And he was accepted and loved as being a member of their AB. He was, all the guys in the AB knew George Harp and loved him. But the thing about George was he was really more out for himself. Here's the difference between George and the rest of the Aryan Brotherhood. I'm going to tell you right now. George didn't have any tattoos. None. Okay? George has never been involved in a murder. Okay? Never. Never even heard of him being involved in a murder. He's never fucked with any sissies in the penitentiary that we've. Because see, when you fuck with sissies in the penitentiary, and most guys have, a lot of the Southern guys, a lot of the Aryan Brotherhood guys, George was the only guy that you never heard about ever fucking with a sissy. So those three things set him apart from the other Aryan Brotherhood guys. You know what I mean? But yet and still they respected and loved him. While George was in Atlanta, after he got arrested and came to Atlanta, he became involved in an escape attempt, also a boxcar, just like Hacksaw Jones, but it was, I don't know what they did wrong, but apparently they didn't have it set up to where they could clear the count at the 4 o'clock count to where the boxcar could be moved out of the institution. They got caught before that. Somebody found something wrong, and they end up, it was like 5 or 6 of them. And one of the guys that got caught with him was Dominic Orsini. Dominic Orsini was one of the French Connection guys. He was from the island of Corsica. And, him and his cousin were both there. And he got murdered there a little later after. He got murdered in 78 sometime. Little Ronnie Shepard, the little redneck, killed him for $5,000 because he was supposed to be cooperating with the authorities in New York about all the heroin that was being transported from France and Corsica into the United States. He was the second member of the French Connection heroin ring that had been murdered in a year there. The first one was Vinnie Pappas. But that had nothing to do with George. The murder had nothing to do with George. George wasn't even in the institution when he got murdered. Um, One of the things I remember most about George is that if he knew you had some heroin or any type of opioid type, whether it be pills or methadone, whatever, he'd come into your cell and rob you, and he was known for that. And everybody that knew him was aware of that, and that's why he never lasted long anywhere. He was always getting locked up for either one thing or another, and like he got locked up on the escape attempt, one thing or another. He was always being, or he was out on a court case, testifying for somebody. Somebody might call him on on a murder case as a witness, or he was always on the move. He was always looking for an escape, and he was always involved in, you know, crazy shit everywhere he went. I remember when I first got to the control unit in '79 in Marion, there was a bunch of guys on the population that had been extorting people. Okay, there was an extortion ring, and they got a bunch of them and sent them into the control unit, for the extortion. And there were white guys from California. There was a couple of Mexicans from California, and there was George Harp. But George Harp, instead of being sent into the control unit, although he did get locked up with the whole, you know, extortion ring of guys, they sent him to Lompoc on a transfer. And everybody was saying, "What's up with that, man? Like, how come he didn't come to the control unit? What's up, man? Is he, how does he get out of all, how did he get out of trouble? How did he get, because Lompoc is a good institution. I mean, it's out in California. There's a lot of heroin there. It's just, it's a step up from Marion, that's for sure. Anyway, um, people kind of suspected there was something wrong, but they were told, "Hey, watch your mouth, man. You're talking about George Harp here, man. What are you insinuating? Are you insinuating that George is a snitch?" You know? So everything, got quiet then. Nobody wanted to say it right out loud, right? Barry Mills kept saying that he was writing to George in Lompoc and that George just wouldn't respond to him. What I later found out was that Barry was sending letters to George telling him that he wanted him to kill certain individuals that were in Lompoc. You know, Barry was a crazed murderer, man. He was just he was so focused. There was never a time where Barry Mills didn't have somebody that he didn't want to kill. Whether he could actually get to him personally or not was another situation, but he would try to make it happen one way or another. So, George being a AB and a notorious AB, he was older than Barry. He was one of the originators. He was there before Barry in San Quentin. So things went on, and what next happened to George? George, first of all, was married to a woman named Barbara. They had been married for years, and she would travel around the country wherever he was. She would go and she would like try to get an apartment close to the prison, and she would visit him, and they would make business happen with drugs and so forth. Apparently, she was with him on the streets when he was doing burglaries and stuff like that as well. Um, George somehow ended up in Terre Haute, and he met an Australian guy there. And the Australian guy had connections in Taiwan. somewhere in China for pure heroin. So here comes George. He wants to help the guy to send heroin on a ship to be picked up in South Carolina when the ship, I think it was a merchant ship or something. I may have some of these details like off a little bit, but this is basically what really happened. He sent Barbara there, okay? She ended up getting arrested too. All the phone calls that they were making from the phone in Terre Haute were being recorded, and everything was being, um, looked into by the FBI and stuff as it was transpiring. They found the heroin. They found other people on the ground, including Barbara, and they were arrested. And an indictment came down, and the uh, the Australian guy and George Harp were apparently indicted for this and went there to South Carolina to be, to go to trial for this case. And somehow during the process, they started an escape attempt from that jail. The escape failed, and George came into court. And apparently George test was like he was an informant. Okay, what came out in all this was that George had been an FBI informant since the late 60s. Late 60s. He'd been an FBI informant since the late 60s. That's when he was still in California. He subpoenaed FBI agent Eggleston. We used to call him the Eagle. Eggleston was an FBI agent who was assigned to uh, Marion Penitentiary for all the crimes that were committed there, murders, drug possessions, weapons possessions, assaults, etc. He was the FBI agent who was assigned to looking into all these crimes and stuff. Apparently, George wanted Eggleston to testify that he was, in fact, an FBI operative, that he was actually a source of information for the FBI. And he was trying to say that, I don't know what he was trying to say, to be honest. But like, was he saying that? I think he was trying to say that he was only setting this heroin deal up so that to help the FBI. I mean, that was what I heard at the time. It's something crazy was going on there, and what really ended up happening is George's covers got blown, and it became known that he had been an FBI informant since around '68. And when I say informant, like I mean like a four-digit informant. Like when you become an FBI informant, I think they give you like a four-digit code. So when you call in, you say, "Hey, this is Agent 1234" or something like that. Like he was actually a source of information for the FBI about all kinds of things. And he'd been involved in all kinds of things with all kinds of crazy motherfuckers. So I'm sure he had a lot of information to give. And that also, excuse me, that also coincides with how he got out of the extortion ring in Marion. Uh, how come he never got sent over to the control unit with all the other guys that were involved? You know what I mean? So anyway, while George was in Lompoc, he was doing his crazy shit that he always does. He had somebody go in and stab somebody else. George never gets his hands there. He never stabs anybody. But the guy didn't die. Apparently, the guy was named John Marzette. John Marzette. things he was pressuring people for. Oh man, it was crazy, man. The things I was hearing were just nuts, right? Uh, what the hell was it? Steve, Steve, the guy that I told you to throw the flammable fluid on Ronnie Bell. He killed a guy in Leavenworth, and he killed a guy in Atlanta over the heroin in the sissy. George was pressuring this guy for heroin, threatening him, saying that, because he had that heroin pipeline set up, because, through the sissy. And I don't know, man. George was extorting people. He was just doing crazy stuff, man. Eventually, he gets sent to El Reno, Oklahoma, which is a medium security institution there. And he was sleeping in bed one day. Apparently, they brought John Marset in from Lompoc. And John Marset found George in his cell sleeping and went in and stabbed the shit out of him. And George jumped up out of bed, and he didn't get killed, all right? But anyway, obviously, he didn't get killed. For that, they send John Marset to the control unit. The day he gets off the bus in the control unit, they put him in F block. And already the word has come that this guy had just finished stabbing George Harp, right? So the AB, well, a couple of guys that were AB guys called him out of the unit and said, "Hey man, there's a guy calling you in this other unit over here, man." So John Marset comes down to look out the window, and they stabbed the shit out of him about 40 times, but he didn't die, all right? This is all because of George Harp. George Harp, the AB is going to stick up for him because he's one of their leaders, right? At this point, they still don't know this is before he had the incident where he got exposed down in South Carolina with the heroin, and his wife divorced him, and she didn't want anything else to do with him because all the crazy shit he was doing ended up getting her in trouble. Anyway, another thing happened where Puppet had killed, the fuck was it? Puppet murdered that guy in Marion, okay? And Puppet was in transit, going I don't know where, but he ends up in the same holding tank with George Harp in El Reno. This is after the murder, before Puppet was ever indicted, okay? They didn't arrest him, I guess, right away for the murder. George wore a wire in the penitentiary and talked to Puppet about the murder, and Puppet bragged about killing the guy. Okay, and George ended up testifying against him as well on the witness stand in Marion. All this stuff came out, I guess, around 84, something like that, 85, something like that. Might have been 83, I don't know. But at this point, George ended up being sent out of state. They started sending him to state prisons, like I think they sent him up to first of all, he sent him to Minnesota for a while. He got transferred out of there. He ended up going to Maine State Prison. All right. And I believe he got out of prison. I'm not exactly sure what happened with that case down in South Carolina. I don't think he got time for it. He might have, but I don't know. I don't have all the details. I'm gonna be honest. I don't have all the details. But everything was nuts with this guy, man. And he was Like, but one thing I want to say about George, in his heart, he wasn't a fucking killer. You know what I mean? Uh, all that bloodthirsty shit the AB wanted to do, he just wasn't about that. You know, he was a Southern boy. He liked to rob banks, burglarize, rob drugstores, burglarize, always attempted to escape, always helped his friends to escape and helped them when they were in prison. That's who he more or less identified with. He didn't really identify with the Aryan Brotherhood the way that, you know, Barry Mills, Puppet, or, all them crazy motherfucking killers. He wasn't like them, but he was a bully and he was a nut and he did a lot of crazy ass shit. Uh, and that's about it, man. Like, there's just a whole lot of stuff that, oh, eventually, George Harp got on the witness stand in the Santa Ana murder trials for the Aryan Brotherhood in 2005, where they had the RICO case with all the murders, and they tried to give Barry and T.D. Bingham, uh, the death penalty. He testified against them as well. He got on the witness stand about that, and he just blew his covers, man. Like it was all over. And the last thing I heard about George Harp, and this is another crazy thing, he was in a witness protection program, right? And they relocated him to like North Dakota or some shit. And he made some kind of bold fucking like robbery attempt on a drugstore. He just wanted to grab some fucking class A narcotics and try to run out of the fucking store. And he got tackled by some people. And that was the last thing I heard about this guy. What ended up happening to him, I don't know. He'd be kind of old if he was still alive. And I don't think he is. But there's no shortage of crazy stories about fucking George Harp. The man was just a fucking lunatic. He was fucking crazy, man. I really liked the guy, man. You know, I don't think he was a bad guy at heart. I think he was a lunatic when it came to drugs, and he was driven by the, he. I could say I identify with him in many ways, except for he was a bully and I'm not, you know, and I couldn't really identify with him on that level right there. But uh, he was an interesting guy, man, and he was a fun guy to do time with too. There's always something going on when George was around. I wish I had more details about what was going on out there in South Carolina. Uh, I don't. And that's it for today's story about George Harp. Like and subscribe. I'm going to leave my Cash App on the bottom of this thing. I hope it shows up. Thanks again. I'll be here again tomorrow with another story.